Everybody, welcome to episode 5 of Destination Unknown. I have been to see Ken Sanders in Utah, and he has sent me to the wonderful Kate Mitas in Oakland, California. I am now coast to coast from Florida to California. Kate is a ephemera dealer mainly. She is a bookseller. Her name of her store is Kate Mitas Bookseller. So I'll have a link on the underside of this channel for everybody. And Kate, I want to welcome you to Destination Unknown. I know our time difference is a little weird today. So the first thing I want to ask you right off the bat, because this has been haunting me for months and maybe even a year or so, ephemera is on the rise in this country. People collecting ephemera. I see it on Instagram. I see it on Facebook Marketplace. I know that the platform Whatnot has a brand just for ephemera. What is happening with the ephemera business, and why is it on the rise?
So that's a good question. There's a couple of different aspects to this. So one thing that's happening is that on an institutional level, so libraries, which I deal with a lot. I sell to universities and colleges and museums and stuff like that all the time, and they already have all the books. So they're starting to realize that they can fill gaps in their holdings with ephemera. So that's one thing that's happening. So just sort of at that level of things, institutions are trying to fill their collections with ephemera. Ephemera also speaks more directly often to what's happening on the ground. So I deal a lot with 19th and 20th century American social history. Social movements, they handed out flyers, they didn't send out books. So you're getting a lot more sort of granular history in ephemera that institutions, that collectors want to snap up. That said, there's also, when you look at sort of things like platforms like Whatnot and just general collectors, people who aren't necessarily institutions or building these massive collections, there's something about ephemera that I mean, it's often more graphic. It's not meant to last. I mean, that's the definition of ephemera. It's something that was, it's a document that's not meant to last. So it's the fact that it survived is really cool. So you have this often very graphic, very interesting looking, very ephemeral piece of paper that that speaks to a very particular moment in time. And I think people just absolutely love that, especially in the digital age. I feel like a lot of kids are really getting into ephemera because it's like something they can touch that connects them to a time period that they wouldn't know about otherwise, and that they can often afford, which is the other part of it.
So are you seeing a younger generation popping up asking you questions about this? Or are you seeing them at the book and the ephemera shows across the country?
Absolutely. Not so much. It's really interesting. So I belong to the Ephemera Society of America, which is a really great organization, and it brings together a lot of ephemera collectors. And a lot of the people in that organization, they've been doing this for 40, 50 years, back when ephemera was totally not cool. Like, they were denigrated by the book trade for collecting ephemera. And they have collected so much that now they're looking for very niche things. Like, I had a guy, I went to the Ephemera Society fair, and a guy was like, "Do you have peanut butter jar labels?" And I was like, that's a great, cool thing. I do not have any of those. So people are very, focused on that. But I was just at a book fair last week, and I had brought a lot of radical material, including, a lot of radical ephemera, not expensive stuff, because I like to have stuff that, anybody who walks into my booth can afford, regardless of budget. And the kids were they were so enthusiastic. They were buying postcards of ACT UP posters. The posters themselves would go for, probably a couple $1,000s, but the postcards are, I was selling them for $20, and the kids were so happy. They were going to put them on their walls. They were going to give them to their friends. You never know. It
Ephemera collectors in the making. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, that what you're saying to me earlier is the universities and the libraries are trying to fill in their gaps, because, as you and I both know, there's X amount of books published on the subject, and once you have that, it's done. And now you're finding the way to put those bricks together with, I guess, mortar being the ephemera. it seems like it's so much on the rise though that I'm seeing it everywhere in my feeds on my social media. Are are you getting more and more calls about not just new collectors, but collectors who've been sort of hibernating for a long time because it wasn't popular? Now they're graciously giving you a call and seeing what you have in your inventory.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm still relatively new as a dealer on my own. I've only had my own business for about 7 years now. So I'm still getting my name still sort of getting people are still getting to know my name. There's a couple of ephemera people who when I go to book fairs, they will seek me out.
Okay.
And that's so, I feel so honored by that because they have so much stuff and they're like still come by to see if they can find something cool to add to their collections.
Right.
Um, but we're not yet at the point, I think, where ephemera collectors are, and this is a horrible thing to say, but where they're dying off and their collections are going out into the universe. I don't
Right.
think we're really at that point yet. So there's not a flood of material. So it's a kind of really great moment where there's not tons of stuff necessarily flooding the market from these big collections, but there's so much interest in it. So there's a great thing happening where there's a lot of interest. Everybody wants it, and they're learning, I think, from these big collectors. I mean, I know there's one collector I know, Lisa Baskin, who built this amazing collection of that's now at Duke University. It was 500 years of women's work. So it's
Okay.
all kinds of material showing women working, and a lot of it was very ephemeral material. And she could get that very inexpensively when she was building the collection, and now that stuff is going for regular prices. So it's interesting. You can sort of see how the market is changing, um, and because so many collectors in the book trade are sort of moving more towards ephemera, the book trade is changing to accommodate them. And that means that the people we buy from, which are often just people on Facebook or flea
Right.
markets and stuff, are learning, hey, this is interesting stuff that sells. So then they bring more of that to the market, and it kind of it's a big I can't think of the right word. It's the word for it's like a ecosystem. It's a big ecosystem
Yep.
of ephemera
Like a
that's
niche.
happening right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you say that about flea markets because I'm an avid flea market goer. And
Mhm.
even still now, you can buy a box of just random papers from someone with that they got from a warehouse buy. And you can buy a box of papers for $5 or $10. And that box of papers is going to have some photographs in it. It's going to have some checking documents, some banking. I mean, it's just, it's a complete mystery box that you're
Hmm.
buying for $5 or $10. Is that something that you're still actively doing? You're still hunting the flea markets in California and you're buying that way?
Oh yeah. I mean, I have found that I've had some really good finds at flea markets. So, and there's some really good flea markets in the Bay Area. So I hit them pretty regularly. Some of my coolest things, you pick up because people they just don't want to do the research. They don't care. They've just cleaned out a storage locker and they're just moving. Maybe they're a furniture guy and they just, need to move the paper. And so like you can get some good deals. Um, One of the coolest things I got a bunch of cookbooks, and this guy was selling them for like, $2 a piece. I got some great stuff that I sold for several $100s each.
Cook,
Um,
we're talking cookbooks with a spiral bound.
Not spiral bound, like little ephemeral pamphlet
Okay,
cookbooks.
I got you. I got you. Yep.
Yeah, so like one of them was an African American chef from California in like the early 1900s
Oh,
promoting
yes,
himself.
yes, sure.
I mean, stuff like that where it would have totally gone into the trash. This guy
Mhm.
happened to save it, but he was just trying to move it along, and I got lucky. So yeah.
I know that a lot of people who are watching this are going to be very excited because of what exactly you just said, because I think that I have a Patreon group called Paper Gold, and we have just under 100 members now, but we have a lot of members who always ask about ephemera, and I feel like they're turning away from it because we don't talk a lot about it. But now
Hmm.
with what you just said, and I know when they view this, they're going to be snatching up those boxes in whatever region of the country they live in. Um, can you talk a little bit about? I know you just got back from a show. The show was in
Hmm.
New York.
Mhm.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that. And you don't have to give out your numbers of what you did unless you want to. I know what it is. She told me ahead of time. Um, but it's such an amazing business to me. And I deal mostly in books. So I'm shipping 3, 4, 5 pound items. You're doing 6 ounce items. Talk a little bit about what you saw, what you witnessed, and did you go there last year? If there was a lot more people this year than last year.
Sure, yeah. So it's the fair is the New York International Antiquarian Book Fair, which is put on by the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America, or the ABAA.
Mhm.
And it draws in dealers from all over the world. They bring their fanciest stuff. So there will be, I don't know if there was a first folio of Shakespeare this year, but I think there was last year,
Okay.
like $1 million books,
Right.
right? And and for those guys, they only need to sell $1 million book and they've had a very good fair, right? Um, I don't have $1 million things. I have ephemera is not usually that kind of money, but archives are. So um I did do the fair last year, and I brought several archives last year, and I brought several archives this year, and both times the archives sold. I had to like scramble to fill the holes in my booth. Um,
So you
and
sold a complete archive of what you brought from California to New York, and it all sold.
it all sold, yeah. So you sell it all as a group because it's an archive.
That's a great problem to have, Kate.
It is, it is. Yeah, I was not complaining. I was just realizing this is the second year in a row and I could probably bring more stuff. But the nice thing about selling ephemera is, so I mean, the people who come and they bring their huge books that cost so much money, like they have to spend, I don't even know how much on shipping just to get everything there. And I shipped a box of posters and a box of supplies to some friends in New York ahead of time, and I flew with 2 Pelican cases, and that was it, because I can fit so much into those Pelican cases that, like, even trying to hit the 50-pound max that I can have to have it as a check on the plane,
Right.
like I'm good to go. So it's definitely a different thing. I did pretty well. I learned a lot about like sort of what people are looking for. I think I brought a lot of 20th century radical material this time around. So I had some really cool radical posters.
Can you be a little bit more specific about that with the word radical? Are we talking about the women's movement? Are we talking about workers' history, the socialism movement?
Yeah, so in this case, so my general focus is actually 19th and 20th century social history with an emphasis on women's history. So some
Okay.
of it was definitely women's related. One of the archives was a woman named Lolita Lebron, who was a
Okay.
Puerto Rican nationalist who actually shot up Congress in the 1950s in an effort to gain Puerto Rican independence from the U.S. So it was a bunch of posters about her and her history and her continuing advocacy for Puerto Rican independence. And that was like a top shelf in my booth, and that all sold to an institution who was very happy to get it. And it was partly because it was radical stuff and partly because it was a woman. It was doing the radical stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, so it's that kind of thing. I also had a big collection of Young Lords Party material. So the Young Lords Party um, was another Puerto Rican group. They were founded in Chicago. Then a branch started in New York, and since it was the New York Fair, I brought all New York centric Young Lords stuff. And it was posters that you never see anywhere else, that kind of thing. And so people were excited. I actually sold that before the fair even opened. You know, um,
You had a good weekend, didn't you?
it was a good weekend. It was a good weekend, and I had fun. And it's for me. I'm always just I go to these fairs, and I'm always like, I don't want to lose money, and I just want to meet some new people and make some new customers. And
Right.
that's my end goal, no matter what. But when I do better than that, I'm always a little happy too. So
Of course, of course. So you went there carrying 2 pelicans. What did you come home with? I know you bought something.
So the coolest thing I bought, so at this fair, there's a shadow fair, which is like a fair across the street
Okay.
that was run by a group called Rare Books LA. And one of the women who was doing the fair, who I know there, had this great photo album of a woman wrestler from Cuba in the 1950s. And I could not resist that. And I'm building this collection of women in sports history, so this was just perfect for it.
I mean, the beauty of this is it's cross-cultural,
Hmm.
it's cross-chronological. I mean, it's through many decades, I'm guessing.
Hmm.
So it just, the collector out there, it's hard to niche because everything is, the niche is broad, isn't it? Even with what you're
Yeah,
doing,
I
there's
think
so,
that's one of
there's
the
so
great
much
things.
inside. Yeah, there's so much
Yeah,
inside.
that's one of the great things about, especially about ephemera, is that you can pick your budget, you can pick your focus, and there will be material for you. It's not like, I mean, if you're really into incunabula or something, like, you have to have a pretty big budget to start out. And it's like that kind of, good luck finding those. That's a very hard market to get into. But with ephemera, like, you can just pick anything you love, and I guarantee you will find something that you can add to your collection.
How recent can ephemera collecting be? Now we're 2024, but I'm thinking that there are people that I know who buy books from me. I mean, there's someone who always buys every wrestling magazine I ever get.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think that if I had ever happened upon a box of photos of the early 2000s of wrestling, um, that that's, I mean, that's not a long time ago, but are people at these shows showing things within the last 20 years as well?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the subject matter a bit. So for example, um, I would say probably if I had a bunch of wrestling stuff, like wrestling photos from the 2000s, I might sit on them and let them age a bit.
Okay.
Because there's just not as big of a market. I don't have a customer who's like,
Right.
who would buy them up automatically. But if I had something, and I have had this, where I've had stuff from like 2015, that's an animal rights thing. So
Mm,
it's something like that. Like, that is an ongoing um discussion that's been going on for,
right.
150 years. And so people will add that kind of material to their collection. It's not going to be as valuable as something that's older
Right.
necessarily. But
Oh, yeah,
yeah, it just depends.
if you ran across, I'm just saying, if you ran across a box or some 1990s Greenpeace posters or 1980s Greenpeace posters, that would
Mhm.
be something that you would say, okay, this has an audience somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. Again, though, it's the value it's just going to depend on how common the material is, really. That's always the biggest factor. And condition and all of that. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So like women's stuff, there if you go to like second wave feminism, 60s, 70s,
Mhm.
there's a ton of stuff out there. And a lot of the people who collect that, or the institutions who collect that, are kind of saying, we've got a lot of this stuff. So interestingly, even though that is older, something from like Riot Girls, like a Riot Girls feminism, or sort of the growing third wave feminism or fourth wave feminism, whichever wave we're in right now, that might have more resonance with somebody because there's just so much more of the other material that survived.
That's interesting. That's
Yeah.
interesting. So are universities contacting you and you're fulfilling what their needs are, or do you find what you find and then you source them out? How does that work as an ephemera dealer?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. I would say it's much more of the me finding stuff and learning what curators at these institutions are looking for and then offering it to them, then vice versa. But I mean, a lot of these curators, they come to the book fairs, they shop online. You know, they'll find stuff if they're looking for it, but it's much, I find it, especially because when I was starting out, I just didn't have a lot of operating capital. And so it's much easier for me to buy with a customer in mind. So
Right.
if you learn what people are looking for, if you learn what institutions are looking for, and you say, ah, I know you're building a collection of such and such, and so you start finding stuff that will might work for them, there's a much greater chance that they'll buy it. So
Is there is there a website that other ephemera collectors utilize with universities where universities say we are looking for this and
no,
no,
no, that doesn't exist. It would be nice. It would be really nice. But yeah,
that seems like
that's
the
the
easiest
other.
solution.
I know. It would be really good, but part of it is that I mean, you can go to institutional like a lot of them will have on their websites, you know, the kind of collections they have. But a lot of those aren't updated very regularly,
Right.
and you know, their collection focuses change, their priorities change, their money changes, like what they can spend money on and that sort of thing. So it really is best to sort of form those personal collect connections via book fairs or via cold calling or however you want to do it, to be able to have a relationship where you can build on that.
But I have to guess that not all universities in their budget can send their buyers across the country all the time. I mean,
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
yeah, I'm guessing some of them are just looking on eBay and
Some
various
of
other
them, although some
social.
of them are not allowed to buy on eBay.
Really?
Yeah, there are various restrictions about like how they can spend money. Some of them don't even have credit cards that they can use. So it's like it's all very it's very bureaucratic. So you have to
Yeah.
kind of, that's why I mean sometimes if I have something, say I have so I'll give you an example. I have uh, something for an Iowa, that's an Iowa item. It's a bunch
Okay.
of photos from a WPA project. I forget what it was, before the WPA existed, but it was one of the early programs in
Okay.
Iowa. And I thought, well, you know, it's an Iowa thing. So I reached out to an Iowa institution and I said, hey, you know, this is an Iowa thing. It seems like it might be something you want. And the curator there was so nice and said, this isn't for us, but try such and such at the historical society, try, you know, so it's like sometimes people will point you the right way, but you do have to reach out and sort of say, I have this, um I think you would be interested. There's sort of a way to do it in a, so you don't bother them, you know, and a lot of times they don't reply. It can be very soul crushing when you're like, I have something that I think you would want, and they just never reply.
Please answer
But it is
your
what it is,
email. Please answer your email. There's three attachments. I understand.
Yeah.
Is there still a lot of WPA stuff out there being found, or has most of that been dug up?
I would say a lot of it's been dug up, but this is sort of where collections are sort of, you know, the life cycle of a collection is a lot of the older collectors are now sort of giving away their collections or they're passing away, and so their collections are coming onto the market. So it's sort of, I think there we'll be seeing more WPA material over the years, and it'll just be, it's really interesting because graphically, there's still so many collectors just based on the graphics of the WPA
Oh,
material.
yes. Even in my end of the business with books, anytime I get a Rivers of America series,
Hmm.
I mean, it doesn't last long at all. There's that WPA collector is still out. I mean, that's also a growing audience too, is the WPA, ear-
Absolutely, yeah.
early American history. Not so early, but 20th
But
century.
yeah, I mean, it's the Art Deco graphic, it's the social programs, it's coming out of the Depression, which I think still has a lot of resonance for those of us who survived the Great Recession. You know, so I mean, I think it's, yeah, there's a lot of resonance to a lot of material that younger people, younger collectors are starting to say, hang on, I don't have to get just the reproduction of this. I can get the real thing.
Right.
And that's sort of a big changing moment.
So how often, and I'll reveal my number, but how often are you still picking? Are you going every day?
No, I do check. So I've sort of I still go to the flea markets at least every, there's one every month that's really good. And then
Okay.
I go maybe to a couple more on the weekends. And then I have a couple, I've sort of graduated a bit now, so I have a couple of local scouts that I follow on eBay. So I
Okay.
see what they're picking, and then like I can buy from them that way, as opposed to being out there, because it is very time consuming, and I'm the only one in my business, and I have to do shipping, I have to do bookkeeping, I have to do cataloging. It's yeah.
Understand.
Yeah. How often are you going out there? Because I bet
I'm
you're out
going,
there every
I'm
day.
probably 5 days a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love the book. I love the book selling business. I do love it. And I love building communities, and getting people closer like we're doing now. Um, but nothing beats just waking up early
Yeah.
and going out there. I mean, I'll go to the flea market at 5:30 in the morning down here in Florida. Uh,
Hmm.
not me, but there are people out there with miners helmets with the lights on,
Yep.
and they're deep diving. So
Hmm.
I'm about 5 days a week, but I've also developed, like you, I've developed relationships with certain dealers, and so I get phone calls all the time when people find
Hmm.
things. Do you find that yourself as well, that going to the flea market, you've developed relationships with certain people who are out there all the time, and they buy a storage locker and they know to call you when they don't want to deal with that file cabinet of paper?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think that's actually um that's the best thing that can come out of visiting the flea market. Because yeah, sometimes you're gonna happen upon something that somebody overlooked, or that you have a customer for, and they don't know that it's worth anything or whatever. But I feel like you get a lot more sort of value for your time when people are out there and they just set things aside. So
Right.
there's nothing better than walking up to somebody's booth at their flea market and they're like, "Oh, hey, I found something for you." And they pull it out from under the table and you're like, "I got first dibs.
Yeah.
I got, I get to, whatever." And maybe you pay a little more for the privilege,
Always. Yeah. Yeah.
but it's still worth it, because often, you wouldn't get that thing
Yeah.
otherwise.
I mean, if without that relationship, chances are if you didn't hit upon it, it is going to get thrown away, because we know what a box of paper at a flea market does at the end of the day at 3 in the afternoon. It's
It's
gone.
gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I know you and I don't want to think about this, but the things that probably get thrown away across this country
Hmm.
from flea markets. Somehow, Kate, we got to wrangle that business in. We got to call the business the 3 p.m. picker
Right.
and get them at all the flea markets in the country.
Yeah.
Because it's utterly amazing what I know that I've saved and you've saved.
Hmm.
So how did you get into the business?
I got into the business, I think, as many people do. I sort of just stumbled into it. So I was living in Providence, Rhode Island. I was working for an environmental organization, and thinking about going back to school. I was really sort of unhappy with where I was at. But I was a regular at a bookstore, used and rare bookstore there. And one day I went in, and I'm not making this up. I was looking for a book of poetry by Philip LaVine called "What Work Is," and the owner of the bookstore said, "Well, we can." He didn't have a great filing system. Basically, he would just write down what people wanted on index cards and try to remember.
Mhm.
And so he wrote down it on the index card, and he was like, "Oh, but did you check this, this section?" So I ran over and I checked that section, and I came back. It's like, "Not there." He's like, "Wow, you did that so fast. You should work here." And I was like, "Ha ha ha! Are you hiring?" And he said, "Bring me your resume." And I worked there for close to 7 years. I ended up managing the store, and that was the start. Yeah.
That is so coincidental. That's how I got my start as well. I was in a
Hmm.
antiquarian bookstore, and I was there as a customer, but a customer asked the owner a question that I knew the answer to. And
Hmm.
by the time I left that afternoon, I was hired and worked and managed that store for about a decade. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
But here's what I want to ask. You were looking for a Philip LaVine book. I
Hmm.
know Philip LaVine. What was the this is me deep diving you now. What was the reason you were looking for that specific book? Was there a poem that you were looking for that may have been only published in that book? What was the reason for you desiring that Philip LaVine book?
I think, and I don't know if it was. So I really liked Philip LaVine. I really liked him then, and I still like him. And there was a poem that I had heard of, but I couldn't find like in in other anthologies or something, and it was the title of the book. It was what work is.
Okay.
And I wanted to have it. I think I was feeling at loose ends. I was like 25. I was feeling at loose ends with like what I was doing with my life and what I wanted my work to do. I wanted to find work that gave me meaning, and I thought I'm going to find this poem, and yeah. And then I did end up getting that book from that store, like years later, but I'd already found work that gave me meaning. So that was being a bookseller. Yeah, yeah.
It all somehow it all does manifest itself. I mean, so oddly, it really does.
Yeah.
Were you a student in New England going to bookstores all the time?
No, so I actually I had gone to school for a little bit in Ohio and then dropped out and did AmeriCorps, which is like a volunteer program. So I did that in St. Louis, and I was still, I mean, I was a pretty lost kid. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, And so then after that, I moved to Fairbanks, Alaska, and worked at a hotel up there.
How interesting is this story getting already? But let me pause you real quick.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You had to have been a reader.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've been
So
a lifelong reader.
yeah,
Yeah.
you were a voracious reader, and somehow Philip LaVine comes in. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, probably. Okay, so you're in
Yeah.
Fairbanks, Alaska.
So I went to Fairbanks, Alaska. I didn't have any job lined up, so I just sort of hit the town limits and started calling anybody in the classifieds, because this was before I had a cell phone or anything. And so it's like calling anybody in the classifieds at a payphone on the edge of town. Got an interview at a hotel, got the job, and ended up just working there for a year and kind of realizing Alaska wasn't for me, but it was, it'd been an interesting experience. So then I came down and I was working in the Bay Area, and I tried to do this like I'll just show up and get a job thing, and it was much harder in the Bay Area. But I got a job for an environmental organization, and eventually, after some more wandering around the Southwest and attempting to like live out of my truck and do all of these young person things that didn't quite pan out as I'd hoped they would, I wound up working for the same environmental organization in New England, in Providence, that I'd worked for in San Francisco.
Are they still around?
They are still around. It's called Clean Water Action.
Okay.
They're a national
Yeah,
organization.
let's promote them, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, they do good work. They do good work. And yeah, and I think it was just the life of an organizer is it wears on you after a bit. It's good when you're young, but when you're trying to like you're out in all kinds of weather, trying to talk to people about doing environmental work, and it does wear on you after a while. And so I was like, maybe I should try to go back to school. But then I got the job at the bookstore, and I tried to go back to school a bit. It still didn't really pan out. So yeah, but I've always been a lifelong reader. I love reading. That's like my favorite
Right.
thing to do ever. So yeah.
But I'm sure you and I are alike like this. Once I was working in that bookstore, there was something internally I knew I was going to be doing this for the rest of my life.
Oh, absolutely.
Even though
Yeah.
I did become a high school teacher and a basketball coach in
Hmm.
between, but there was always a voice in my head that said books, 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 books. And
Hmm.
I always felt so comfortable working in a bookstore. It just felt like a natural environment to me.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it was like, I mean, I think I felt so lost everywhere else, and then I found like a home in a bookstore, and I was like, this is my place. I want to figure out how I can do this for the rest of my life, and that's sort of been my goal since then. So
And
yeah.
I'm sure you made great relationships with customers who would come in and they would get to know
Mhm.
you, and then they would ask you, what's a great read? Give me a recommendation.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, putting the right book in the right person's hand is like, that's what it's all about. No matter whether it's a $2 book or a $2,000 book, or you're selling to an institution but that the right researcher is going to find that book there, or that ephemera, that archive, whatever it is. Like, it's all about that moment. It's just magical when you get the right book in the right person's hands. It's a beautiful thing.
And they come back. I
And
mean,
they come back and they talk about it, and you learn from them. Like, it's just,
yeah,
yeah, it's a
there's no,
magical
I
thing.
know the answer is this because there's no words for it. I,
Right.
I understand. I completely understand that. It's completely magical. It's metaphysical. It's got all those great qualities to it. So I know that you deal in books as well, but ephemera is the main thing. So how did, since you loved working in the Rhode Island bookstore so much, where did you shift gears and when did you shift gears into saying, okay, ephemera seems to be where I'm graduating towards?
Yeah, so after I left the bookstore in Rhode Island, I at that point I knew I wanted to have my own business, but I didn't know how to have an open shop as a single like proprietor. Like it's so hard. Like I knew how hard it was with three people working there at the shop in Providence, and I was like, I can't do this on my own. So, but that was what I had in mind, that I would have an open shop. It would be a used and rare shop like the one in Providence. And then I worked for a bit. I just needed to pay off my student loans. So I moved back to Ohio where I'm from, worked for a bit, paid off all my loans, and did all sorts of jobs, including working at a bookstore there. And that bookstore sort of got me to a job in Alameda, in California, at Tavistock Rare Books, which is a purely antiquarian shop. And I started working there, and my boss there really didn't like doing ephemera. He didn't like doing ephemera. He didn't like doing archives. He loved doing books. That's his thing. And so I got stuck doing all the ephemera. And when I worked in Providence, I used to hate doing ephemera because like you would work and I mean, it was much more of a quantity business where you have to sell a lot to, it's like a lot, you got to churn out constantly. You're always on that hamster wheel. And you would have a pile of ephemera and you'd like work on it all day and you'd barely make like this much of a dent in it. And it would be like, oh my gosh, why am I doing this? But then when I was working at the shop in California in the Bay Area, I one of the first things I worked on was this archive of 24 diaries that this guy had written, who he lived in Illinois and then he moved to Colorado during the mining boom in the 1870s, 1860s, right? And my boss had bought it on the basis of it being a mining thing, but then hadn't, like, he just sort of flipped through and he hadn't found any major mining stuff, and he'd kind of given up on it. So I was like, you know what?
Major mining stuff according to him.
According to him, yes, yeah. But then I sat down and I was like, well, you know what? I found it really fascinating. I ended up working late because I didn't think I could spend that much time on it, like at work. And so I ended up like I'd stay till like 9 o'clock at night reading these diaries. And I discovered that this guy had been like, he not only worked in the mines, he was like the key bread baker for the miners at the mines. And so like he was like baking bread and complaining about like all the mining stuff, and it was this huge thing. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, there's all this magic hidden in
And
this.
daily diary entries.
Daily diary entries, 24 diaries, um daily diary entries describing everything about his life in the mines. He escorted his mother to the first time she voted, um like stuff like that. Like it was just like,
Right. And that even falls into what you like to do now. I mean, that
exactly. And so then I was like, you know what, maybe this ephemera stuff is actually pretty cool. And I just sort of, I found like I have a really good sense of when things can have value and when it's worth researching them. And I'm good at doing the research. I like doing the research. So it just became my thing. Yeah.
oh, that's amazing. Okay, so I'm guessing you don't have that sold eventually.
Oh my gosh, it sold within 5 minutes of us putting it out for sale. Yeah.
Okay, let's get that story. Okay, what platform or how did it sell?
So yeah, so we put it out in an e-list, a catalog.
E-list, sure, okay.
So we put it out on like to our mailing list. I don't think it even hit like the other listservs we're on. And immediately we got like 5 orders for it, including it ended up going to Yale. Yale was very happy to get it.
But not an auction.
Not an option, no.
You had a flat price on it,
Hmm.
and 5 people wanted to buy it.
Hmm. And it was
And
$4,500, so it wasn't cheap.
right, but I have to guess this that the boss said to you, did we price it too low?
Well, honestly, I actually was like, because that's what it had been priced before I started working on it. Like he was like, he just sort of had thought, okay, well, it's a $4,500 thing. Go ahead and do your thing. And then I did my thing and I wrote up this amazing, I mean, it was like a long write-up. And he still had it at $4,500. And I was 3 weeks after I started there. I didn't say anything really. And yeah, I kind of think now I'm like, yeah, I'd put a much bigger price on that. But you live and learn,
That's gonna pop up in Christie's in another year or two for 55. Do you ever get an itch to go back to Alaska and ephemera hunt there with all the greatness of ephemera that there probably is still there? Because although it's still a growing state, there's such a rich history of the wilderness and hunting and
Yeah, I mean,
gold mining. I mean,
it's interesting. So I I I don't know that stuff has been saved there in the same way that it's been saved in the lower 48. So
right.
like I know there was a pretty big and long time bookseller, I think based in Juneau, whose collection I sort of had a chance to look at. And it wasn't um it wasn't the coolest stuff that you would imagine. It wasn't like miners' diaries and
Right.
things like that. And maybe she just already sold those because that kind of thing, when you get something that's really cool, some often that just sells first.
Right. But even, in a box of ephemera, I would love to find an old map. I mean, not a treasure map, but just
Right.
just an early Alaskan map
Oh yeah.
of the river basins and, the forests and
Right.
all. Yeah.
I think the other thing about Alaska is that people don't tend to, I mean, sometimes they go and they stay, but often, especially the people doing the exploration or doing the mining or just there for migrant work kind of thing, they go and they come back to the lower 48 and I think they bring their stuff with them. So that's part of it. I don't know. I don't have a sense that there's like a ton of treasures up in Alaska, partly because I think it's just I feel like you would have to be able to you'd have to get on the bush plane and you'd have to go to like the small communities that you can't get to by road. And
Mhm.
that's probably where there's a lot of cool stuff. But you have to know the people, you have to have an inn to get there, all
They
of
may
that.
not be giving that up either.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, especially because a lot of it I'm sure is material that has to do with like tribal history and they're not, that they deservedly want that to stay in their tribe. So, yeah.
Interesting. So interesting. So I have a few more questions for you. As a bookseller, there are books that I sell, and then sometimes I'm not a collector, but I regret selling
Hmm.
because I wanted to keep it a little bit more.
Hmm.
Is there a piece or a series of ephemera that you sort of wish you still had that you did let go of?
Oh, I mean, I have lots of loves and and I almost always regret them for a little bit and then I'm like, well, they went to a good place. That's what matters. But oh gosh, there's so many. One of the things in that cookbook collection I picked up at the flea market, one of them was a Volvel. So Volvels are like the wheels.
Okay.
Where there's a wheel that you spin and it tells different things. And this one was it was shaped like a Chianti bottle
Okay.
and it was a cocktail, it was giving cocktail recipes and it was just so gorgeously illustrated and you spun the wheel and it would give you a
Give
different
another
recipe
recipe. Oh yeah.
and it was beautiful. It was done by this amazing artist who she was like I couldn't find out much about her. She'd done I think some like maybe other illustration work, taught art for a bit and then just sort of disappeared from the scene. But it was so adorable and it was so well preserved. It was like there was nothing wrong with it. It was in perfect condition.
Was it American or was it
It was
French?
American, yeah, it was American. And it was done probably very shortly after Prohibition ended. Because and it was just oh, it was just so gorgeous. And I have it as my I have the picture of it on my website as my like cookbooks or cooking category because I love it so much. But yeah, that one I still wish I had because it's just so pretty.
I can see the regret in your face already.
You had to
You're
remind me. Thanks,
visually
Max.
thinking about turning that wheel and going,
Oh, I
look
love
at
ball
that
bells.
Chianti. So interesting. Is, there's a like we talked about, there's a growing audience for this, young, old, but completely growing audience. And it's right place, right time to find
Mhm.
things. What advice would you give to the neophyte ephemera collector who is trying to get a little bit deeper into the business?
Mhm.
Because of my paper gold members, we definitely have people who would love to venture from into books, but also do ephemera. So, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one thing I would do, so I have this book, by Maurice Rickards, called The Encyclopedia of Ephemera, and it's not expensive. I think you can get it for like 25 bucks on Amazon. And what it does is it gives you the terminology. So that's really, I feel like that's the starting point, is you need to know what you're working with, whether it's a cabinet card, whether it's a circular, whether it's a flyer. You just need to have the right terminology so you can connect with the right people. The other thing I really would recommend, so there are different research sites that I use for ephemera than I do for books. So, for example, I have a Worth Point membership,
Yeah.
which gives you all the eBay, because a lot of ephemera, it doesn't show up necessarily on the book selling history
Right,
sites, but it
right.
shows up on eBay history
It
sites.
won't show up on the auction sites, more or less.
Exactly.
Maybe heritage auction, but it's always going to be on eBay. Sure.
Yeah, so I mean, and certainly, I mean, you can get the auction records for, but it's auctions weren't necessarily of ephemera going
Right.
back as long. So yeah, so I have a Worth Point subscription, which gives me a sense of like how many comparables are out there. So that's really useful. I also really recommend getting, and I know it gets all these subscriptions get expensive, but like ancestry and newspapers.com, because a lot of times with ephemera, especially if you're talking not printed ephemera, but like letters and things like that, you need to figure out who these people are. You need to see like if you can find out. Sometimes it's finding out when things are, because a lot of times ephemera doesn't have dates on it. So being able to do the research accurately and give dates. I mean, it's all about just being accurate so people know what they're getting. So you have the right terminology, you have the right dates for when things happened, you know who the people are, you know where they were when they were writing this, whatever. All of that's super important. Um, and yeah, I mean, I would say that's the biggest thing, is just the one thing I will say is that for anybody starting out in ephemera, there are going to be times that you spend an hour trying to figure out what you have, and it turns out that it's only worth 20 bucks. That is going to happen.
That's
But as you
the learning process, though.
Exactly. As with anything, like the more you handle stuff, the more you kind of learn, oh, this is, and as you build customers, you're like, oh, this is for this customer, this is for that customer, this is why this is important. But you have to handle a lot of it to really get a sense of things.
I mean, I get calls all the time that someone has a book from the 1870s and it's
Hmm.
worth $10,000, and you have to explain to them, in the book world, the 1870s really isn't that old.
Right. Right.
Everybody had books. Most people had books back then of some
Mhm.
general wealth. Um, so there's a lot of people who get sad because their initial idea is anything from the 1800s is always going to is a treasure find.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So if someone's new to ephemera hunting, I mean, I'm guessing that you would say to them, don't decide what you want to find. Let what you find decide the direction you go.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I think as with any sort of book selling, like your customers define how you like what kind of material you buy to a great extent. And also the kind of material you can find defines what you sell. So I mean, I shop at flea markets and stuff a lot. I don't buy from auctions. So most of the stuff I find is 19th and 20th century,
Right.
because that's what shows up at flea markets. Whereas if I were, I mean, you can shop. I'm not good at shopping at auctions because I just find them to be too expensive in terms of like, there's
Right.
not enough margin in there.
And
Uh,
it's exciting to find it yourself,
it's exciting to find it yourself.
not to have
Exactly.
it paraded in the catalog.
Right, right. And often, I mean, when it's paraded in a catalog, it's priced,
Yeah.
it's priced. Um, so yeah, so it's I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. It was Mhm. Ask me your question again.
Not to decide on what you want to collect.
Yes, absolutely. Thank
Let
you.
let the find decide the direction you go.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah. And don't, I mean, you can't impose your idea about what the thing should be
right.
on the thing. It's going to tell you. There's always clues. The type of paper used will be a clue. The type of material that it's, whatever, the type of printing, the if it's a photograph, the type of photograph will tell you like when it's from. There are all sorts of good reference books on like how to find out when photographs are from. That's something I'm still learning a lot about. And yeah, and just to be open to the fact that you don't have to know everything. And that's something that I absolutely love about the book trade in general. You learn something every day. And I think if you just go into it being like, this is going to teach me something, it's a rewarding experience. You have fun and you
And
make money.
yeah, and I think that's why it fulfills both you and I is because we are learners
Hmm.
and you're probably both voracious readers, and it is fulfilling something, in our minds that sort of we've needed all along. Just
Yeah.
that learning curve. So,
Absolutely. The other thing I would recommend, there's two other things I would recommend for people just starting out. One is, so I belong to a trade organization called IOBA, which is the Independent Online Booksellers Association.
write that down and I'll have a link in there for us.
Yeah, please do. What's great about that is there's a listserv that's all just to talk about problems we have. So if you're selling on eBay, if you're selling on Amazon, if you're selling on any of the other platforms, you can get hints from that discuss serve. You can reach out to people with questions. It's like $85 a month, $85 a year to join, so it's not super expensive. And it just gives you access to a community that you can ask questions to, which I think is really important.
Sure, yeah, that's
Um,
that's how we're gonna always get answers.
Exactly, exactly. The other thing I'd recommend, there are definitely ephemera selling groups on Facebook. And what's great about those is you can get a sense of not only what's out there, it's almost like having stuff go through your hands, but you don't have to have the stuff going through your hands. You can see what's out there, you can see what people are interested in, you can see what sells, what doesn't sell, what prices things sell at, like just things like that, where you just sort of have to be in it to understand it.
Yeah, understand the market. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I am definitely going to bring you into the paper gold in the next coming weeks. I think you're going to love getting some of the questions from the members that we have. Um, is there anything you want to say to the novice and ephemera dealer as they're probably going to watch this video and they may say to themselves, okay, I can go to a flea market, I can go garage sailing. Is there a way to hunt, a little bit of a hack to a way to hunt out there, or are they just looking through all papers? Is it maps? Is it, I mean, I know in the sports market, a signed check from Lou Gehrig holds value. So
Hmm.
how broad is it for the new learner of this ephemera hunting?
So it can be as broad or as narrow as you want it to be, I think.
Okay.
I would recommend, like, I mean, even my sort of quote unquote specialty of 19th and 20th century social history and women's history in particular, it just gives me a focus. So I would say if you're going to go out there, think about the things that you want to find.
Right.
And so then you can ask, if you're at the flea market, you can say, do you have anything on such and such? And that will help narrow it down because otherwise it is very broad. I will also say that maps are kind of their own thing. I would say if you want to get into maps, that like learn all about maps, but it's not necessarily gonna be the same as ephemera.
It's its own
It's sort
niche.
of its own category. Yeah. But yeah, definitely just sort of think about like how you can narrow down what you're asking for. Because then you will say, people will say, oh, well, this came like I had somebody at a house call me up and say, oh, there's somebody here who has a bunch of scrapbooks of a woman who is traveling around and it's women, it's scrapbooks, it's ephemera. Okay, sure, that's for me. you know what I mean? Like, so once you sort of get known for something, that can help stuff come to you a little easier.
Amazing, amazing. So do you have any shows coming up that you're going to?
Um, I my next show is actually going to be at something called RBMS, which is so I'm a member of the ABAA, and they have rare books and manuscripts
Okay.
uh,
I'm gonna link them up.
conference. Yeah, so you can go and exhibit there and meet curators. I do a lot of business, direct sales business with curators and institutions and stuff. So that's a really good thing for me. And then the next one I'll be at after that is going to be at Union Station in Los Angeles. And that'll be a traditional book fair, and there will be lots of ephemera there. If anybody wants to come, hit me up. I'll give you tickets.
Now, do you have an Instagram that people can follow you on as well?
I do, yeah. So my Instagram is just at Kate Mitas Books.
Okay.
And that's probably I mean I post on my Facebook page as well, but Instagram always gets it first. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So people who watch this will be able to link up with you and see the sort of things you're purveying.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. I feel like I've met a friend today. I feel like I made a connection here. I love this.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. So the iconic Ken Sanders sent me to you.
Hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. And you know the name of this episode of this show is Destination Unknown. So I have no idea where you're sending me, just as long as you already know that the person is going to okay the next place I go. So where will you be sending me, Kate?
I'm gonna send you to Portland, Oregon, to my friend Scott Brown at Downtown Brown Books.
Oh, beautiful.
Yes. And he does some really cool stuff with eBay selling. And he also does a lot with ephemera and archives as well as books. So I think you'll have a good discussion with him.
Oh, I'm excited about that. Well, thank you very much for your time. It has been an unbelievable journey to go into the ephemeral world with you. I will see you in a few weeks. Hopefully, you'll come into the Paper Gold group and talk to the members, and you're going to get them very excited about what you do. And again, if you need anything from me, just let me know. But I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. This has been fun.
Bye, Kate.
Bye.